The sound of an open palm hitting a cheekbone in a quiet parking lot is surprisingly dull. It does not crack like it does in the movies. It just lands with a heavy, wet thud. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood panting slightly, her hand still raised in the afternoon sun. I had been exactly 3 minutes late picking her up from her bridge club. The sting blossomed across my left jaw, sharp and hot. But as I tasted the faint copper of blood on my back teeth, the only emotion that registered in my chest was an overwhelming, profound relief. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not even raise a hand to touch my own face. Instead, my eyes flicked to the black dome of the security camera mounted just above the pharmacy entrance. Then to the older couple freezing mid-motion, groceries dangling from their hands 2 rows over. Finally, to the digital clock glowing on my dashboard. 2:33. For years, her abuse was invisible. There it is, I thought. Finally, something a judge can see. Before I take you back to the beginning, I need to say this plainly. Some names are changed, and a few identifying details are softened, because my grandchildren did not ask to carry this story. But what happened is real. Every ugly part of it. I am telling it now because for a very long time, I believed women like me were isolated cases, little private disasters hidden inside respectable families. We are not. If someone in your own family ever laid a hand on you or tried to make you doubt what you knew, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I want to know how far this reaches before I tell you how it all began. To understand why that slap felt like confirmation, you have to see how the beginning was arranged. I met Richard when I was 28, old enough to know charm was not character, but still young enough to be comforted by steadiness. He was attentive then. He remembered things, opened doors, called when he said he would. After a childhood that taught me not to expect much, that consistency felt almost extravagant. By then, I was already working in hospital administration, the side of medicine built on policies, signatures, missing forms, and private agendas. It trained me to notice details other people ignored. A pause before an answer, a phrase polished too neatly. The difference between concern and control when both wore the same smile. But I never applied them to Eleanor. The first time Richard brought me to his parents' house, she opened the door as if she had been waiting for me, not just for her son. She kissed my cheek, held both my hands, and studied my face with a maternal warmth. At dinner, she asked about my work, listened, and laughed at my dry little jokes as if they were genuinely funny. Richard watched her watching me, and I could see how proud he was to place me inside that family circle. The night I remember most was a Sunday supper 6 months before our wedding. The table was set with linen napkins and her dishes. Halfway through dessert, Eleanor reached across the table and took my wrist gently. "You are the daughter I never had," she said. Then she opened the small jewelry case beside the china cabinet, lifted out a delicate pearl bracelet, and fastened it around my wrist. It had belonged to her mother. I remembered the cool weight of pearls against my skin and the sudden thickness in my throat. For the first time in my life, I felt as if I was not just marrying a man. I was being welcomed into a family. That was the woman I thought I married into. It took 2 years to meet the real one. After the wedding, nothing changed all at once. That is important. If cruelty arrived wearing a name tag, more people would recognize it. It began with comments so slight they could be brushed aside before they settled. At brunch, Eleanor would tilt her head and say, "You're so brave to wear that color." At holidays, "Richard has always liked women who speak their minds, even when they shouldn't." Then she would smile into her coffee cup as if she had said something affectionate. I would look to my husband, expecting the smallest correction, some ordinary loyalty. Richard never gave it. He laughed softly, or reached for the gravy, or asked his father about football. The silence around an insult can be louder than the insult itself. And then came the house. When we were looking for our first place, Eleanor offered to help young people get established. It sounded generous. She said she could contribute to the down payment, no pressure, no expectations. The paperwork told a different story. Buried under her friendliness was one condition: her name on the deed. Just for tax purposes. I still remember the way she said it, light and airy, as if property law were a matter of sentiment. I said I needed time to review the documents. Richard told me I was making it awkward. Eleanor said I was very formal for family. I declined the money. That was the first moment I saw her warmth cool in real time, like a room after someone opened a winter door. Once the children were born, she stopped pretending quite so hard. She criticized everything with the vocabulary of concern. Their naps were too early. Their coats were too light. Their lunches were too plain. She showed up unannounced and called it help. More than once, she took them out for a little drive without asking me first, as if my role as their mother were administrative and hers was natural law. When I objected, Richard said I was too sensitive. Always those two words. Too sensitive. Not frightened, not disrespected, not undermined. Sensitive. By then I had started keeping a journal, the same way I had documented incidents at the hospital when something felt off before I could prove why. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, times, exact phrases. Who was present? I told myself it was for clarity, but really, I knew something was wrong already. I wish I could tell you there was one revelation, one neat moment when the curtain dropped and everything became obvious. It was not like that. It came in pieces, each one small enough to dismiss if it had arrived alone, and impossible to ignore once they began to stack. The first piece came on a Wednesday afternoon in my kitchen. Richard was in the den with the door half shut, speaking to his mother on speaker without realizing I was coming down the hall. I heard her say, in the calm tone people use when they want to sound reasonable, "She's trying to isolate you from your family." I've seen this before. You need to protect the children. Not help the children. Protect them. From me. I stood still with a dish towel in my hands and felt something inside me go cold. She was not complaining. She was building a story. The second piece came a week later on our family computer. Richard had forgotten to log out of his email. I was looking for a school form when I saw a message from Eleanor with the subject line simply, "Notes." Inside, she had written, "Start documenting her instability. Dates, moods, overreactions, anything involving the children. Be consistent." It was not emotional language. It was strategic language, legal language. I photographed every email with my phone, my hand steadier than I felt. The third piece was social, and in ways that hurt the most. A cousin of Richard's called me by accident when she meant to call him, and in her confusion she asked whether I was doing better. Better from what? I asked. That was how I learned Eleanor had been telling the extended family I was having mental health struggles, that Richard was considering his options, that everyone should be discreet for the children's sake. That was the moment the shape of it became clear. This was not dislike, this was preparation. They were laying groundwork to call me unstable, separate me from my children, and make it sound compassionate. After that, my journal changed. It stopped being reassurance and became a record. I photographed emails, saved voicemails, backed up texts, noted times, dates, witnesses. In hospital administration, I had seen what happened when people brought feelings to a fight that required evidence. I'd been preparing for this without knowing it. Now I knew why. My first instinct was confrontation. I wanted to walk into that den, lay the photographs on the table, and ask my husband how long he had been building a case against the mother of his children. But I had spent too many years watching institutional fights to make that mistake. Confrontation would only accelerate their timeline and give them the chance to destroy what I had already found. Instead, I called Margaret Chen. She had been outside counsel for our hospital on sensitive HR matters years ago, the kind of attorney who spoke quietly and never lost. I told her what I had discovered. She listened without interrupting, then asked one question. "Is there financial dependency between your husband and his mother?" I said I suspected there was. She said, "Find it. That explains his compliance and establishes her control. then find anything showing coordinated defamation. You're not defending yourself anymore. You are building a case. After that call, I made a decision that felt like swallowing glass. I became softer, more agreeable. I apologized to Eleanor for overreacting to her suggestions. I let her take the children more often, smiling as she loaded them into her car. What she did not know was that my phone now carried a recording app, legal in our state with one-party consent, running every time we spoke. I stopped writing in the physical journal entirely and moved everything to encrypted cloud storage she would never think to look for. To Richard, I probably seemed tired, finally learning my place. To Eleanor, I must have looked broken. I let them believe it. I was not broken. I was watching. And every time they spoke freely in front of me, they were handing me another piece of the record that would end this. The pivot was complete. I was no longer reacting to their campaign. I was building my own. For 8 months, I performed the version of myself Eleanor preferred. I misplaced my reading glasses on purpose. I apologized too quickly. I let my shoulders slump when she entered a room, as if her approval were oxygen and I had been running short for years. Around the children, I acted flustered enough to invite correction, but never enough to alarm them. Around Richard, I asked fewer questions about money. He took over the bills with the solemn expression of a man burdened by a difficult wife. I thanked him for helping. The cruelty sharpened, the more harmless I appeared. Eleanor began arriving with casseroles, old toys, little envelopes of cash for school clothes, each one tied to a remark I wrote down later. I know budgeting's hard when you're emotional. I just want the children to have stability. Gifts from her were never gifts. They were evidence of the role she had assigned me. I saved every text. I exported call logs. I photographed checks. I kept a spreadsheet of dates, comments, witnesses, and contradictions. When she told one aunt I was forgetful, then told another I was volatile, I logged both versions. When Richard claimed he was covering expenses from overtime, I checked account transfers and found deposits that arrived every month with mechanical regularity. $3,000. The same date, almost every time. From Eleanor, there it was at last. Not just influence, but income. A grown man receiving an allowance from his mother while helping her build a case against his wife. It explained the obedience in him, that strange boyish deference I had mistaken for conflict avoidance. The call that mattered most came in month 8. Eleanor phoned while I was making dinner, and I answered with the recorder already running. She was in a generous mood, the kind that made her reckless. Richard should have married someone from a better family, she said. Then, after a little sigh, meant to sound compassionate. The children would be better off spending more time with me. You're clearly overwhelmed. My hand tightened around the wooden spoon, but my voice stayed even. I thanked her for her concern, ended the call, and saved the file in 3 places. By then I was no longer a wounded daughter-in-law collecting insults. I was an investigator running a long operation, waiting for one mistake I could carry into daylight at last. My hand still stung when I reached into my bag and turned the phone so it faced her. 3 minutes. That was all I'd been. 3 minutes late, because I'd been sitting in my car with my attorney on the line, finalizing language I'd rewritten 12 times. Eleanor didn't know that. She'd never once asked why I was late. She'd only seen an opening. Say that again, I told her, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. For the record, she was too angry to be careful. That was the gift she gave me, standing there in that parking lot with her hand still raised. You're lucky I didn't do this sooner, she said. You've been a problem since the day Richard brought you home. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I turned and walked to my car, and I felt her confusion follow me the whole way, because silence was never a language she'd learned to read. Within 48 hours, I filed for divorce. I filed a restraining order. I handed my attorney everything I'd spent months assembling without letting myself think of it as evidence. The recordings, the emails, the account statements, a witness statement from a stranger who'd seen a grown woman strike her daughter-in-law over a parked car. Richard was served at his mother's house. I imagined that conversation. I wasn't there for it, and I didn't need to be. He called that evening, then again the next morning. I let both calls ring out because I had already said everything I had left to say to him in a courtroom filing, and nothing he could offer now would undo what his silence had already cost me. Eleanor tried to get ahead of it, of course. She always did. I heard she'd started calling around the family, rewriting the parking lot into something softer, something that made her the provoked party. So I sent one email. To everyone. No accusations, no adjectives, just dates, timestamps, screenshots, a video that ran 4 seconds and said everything. Nobody replied. For 3 days, the family that had once filled my dining room on Sundays went completely quiet, and in that silence I understood something I hadn't let myself believe until now. They already knew. The restraining order was granted on a Tuesday. I remember because it was raining, and I sat in my car afterward for a long time, watching the water move down the windshield, feeling something I could not immediately name. It was not triumph, it was closer to stillness. The divorce proceedings did the rest methodically, the way legal processes do when the evidence is clean. Richard's hidden income surfaced inside the first month of discovery. $3,000 transferred monthly from Eleanor's account to his for years, carefully kept from any conversation we had ever shared about money. The prenup Eleanor had called cold and unnecessary at our engagement dinner held without a single complication. Custody was divided, but the documented pattern of parental alienation carried visible weight in that courtroom. The judge restricted Eleanor's access to the children pending a psychological evaluation. She was not punished dramatically, she was simply supervised. That was enough. A letter arrived from Eleanor 3 weeks after the ruling. She wrote that she had only ever wanted what was best for the family. Her handwriting was careful and old-fashioned. I read it once, set it down, and never responded. There was nothing left to prove, and nothing left to say. Richard called twice in the month that followed. His mother's money was gone, and his version of events had not survived the courtroom. He sounded younger on the phone than he had in years. I let both calls go to voicemail. Some doors, once closed properly, should simply stay closed. 6 months later, I live in a smaller apartment. The rooms are modest, and the light in the afternoon is very good. My children visit on a schedule we are all still learning, but they arrive with their shoes untied and their backpacks half open and their ordinary chaos, and I find I do not mind any of it. We are adjusting. That is an honest word for it. Last month I found the pearl bracelet at the bottom of a moving box. I had forgotten about it entirely. I held it for a moment, feeling the cool weight of it, and thought about throwing it away. Instead, I called my daughter over and fastened it around her wrist. I told her, this was given to me by someone who didn't mean it. I'm giving it to you because I do. She accepted it the way children accept things, completely without archaeology. Here is what I want you to carry with you. Some people never raise a hand. They hit you with years of small cruelties and simply call it love. But the ones who finally swing, they are handing you a gift. They are making the invisible visible. Document everything. Trust yourself and never mistake silence for weakness. If this story found you at the right time, subscribe. I'll be here. And so will you.